Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strouse, and joining me today is Ray Espinoza. Ray is a CISO over at Inspective. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you very much for having me, Pete.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Sure. I'm, as you mentioned, I'm currently VP and CISO of a company called Inspective that does manage bug bounty, as well as pen testing. But I've been able to work through both the technology side and infrastructure operations over into technical security, doing incident response, and then having the opportunity and the privilege of moving up in my career and gaining more responsibility as I go from, director of security to then that VP CISO level role at some amazing companies. So it's been a really fun journey, I think, so far.
Awesome. Yeah. And I imagine that combination of technical ability and more of the documentation side serves you very well. So, generally we start off the show by discussing the talent gap and its validity and what it looks like. So in your mind, does the talent gap exist in security? And if so, what does it look like?
I think it exists in what folks have from an expectation perspective. And I think really those needs, wants, and desires of different organizations are what kind of bring about some of those feelings. I will say that I feel like it's changed a bit over the years. Maybe even 5 years back, I would have looked and said there's definitely a talent gap of experienced security, technical security folks, but there are opportunities to get creative in being able to fulfill, some of that headcount and get amazing people who can grow into some of those roles. I think now, given just the economy and how many companies have reduced force, and historically security teams were like that golden child group where you didn't touch them because they were already a hot commodity. But now with so many companies struggling, that there are a lot of great security folks out there. I happen to be on a dedicated Slack space with lots of other CISOs, and seeing some of them affected or seeing some of their teams affected. I think in today's current market, as of early November, I think we can say that there's a lot of qualified security folks that are out there looking for their next role, and I think even if you're looking at like you're willing to compromise on that, maybe we don't need true security experience. I do think there are a lot of great folks who have a good technical base or have a good base of showing that they can learn, that they can communicate well, that they have these other strengths that they bring to the table. I think you can put them in a position and help them continue to grow and watch them have a positive impact.
For sure, yeah. And you kind of alluded to this, but I kind of think of it more so as an open-minded hiring gap versus a true lack of talent out there. I think, like you said, just getting creative about who you can hire, what skill sets they need to have on day one, what can be taught. With fast learners, there's any number of things they can pick up over 60 days. So I always recommend when somebody's going through the hiring process, think about what you really need on that first day. What do they really need to have as a baseline level of knowledge? And then, the rest you can fill in later. And you have to kind of look at, okay, so what happens if we're asking for the moon, we're looking for this unicorn, and the position stays open for 3 or 6 months? What position does that put the team in at that point? And as you'd mentioned, a lot of really good CISOs on the market right now. We just picked up this search for a CISO. We submitted 7 candidates in 2 days to the hiring manager, and they were thrilled, obviously. But in doing so, I talked to dozens of CISOs, and a lot of very talented, very, combination of technical and GRC backgrounds, people that have done a lot of really good things, especially for startups. But what they've found is with the venture capital money kind of drying up a little bit, a lot of companies were chasing their next round of funding, and it didn't happen. And security seems to be a cost center, and thus first on the chopping block in a lot of cases. So being that I think that's the case for a lot of organizations out there, I know this wasn't what we'd kind of discussed before, but can you think of, any solutions to that, to the cost center dilemma?
I think really it comes down to aligning yourself and your organization into showing how does it bring value to help the company win beyond, a questionnaire or meeting with a customer who's unhappy or a prospect who has, really challenging requirements just to get through procurement. But it's being able to proactively show value. Myself, my team, we spend a lot of time in customer events. We have the opportunity to host regional dinners, with smaller groups of folks to be able to have, great conversations. And by us taking part in some of those, we're adding to the ability to attract new business or meeting with existing customers and building deeper relationships than just showing up in a QBR. All of that adds value. That's not just we're going to help keep the company secure by doing these technical things or getting us through our audit, but building those relationships with customers, with prospects, and being a part of the go-to-market engine, developing content to add legitimacy and validation that the right folks are responsible for security in the organization. All of those things I've seen add positive value. In the past, I've even been at organizations where I've been able to work with our sales operations team and say, we use Salesforce to manage the entire sales cycle. Can we add a custom field in an object where we can identify when security's been engaged beyond, just a questionnaire, and how are we positively impacting some of those? And did we win that business, or was it close loss? And if so, and it's another data point to be able to add of security adding value and have it much more tangible. We would even roll up the amount that the opportunity was for and roll that up on a quarterly basis. So we could say we positively impacted, 2.5 million in revenue for this coming quarter based off of our overall, the meetings, the engagement, the support that we provided this team. And that matters. That makes a really big difference of not just seen as behind the scenes, behind a keyboard, don't talk to folks. And, to have that even resonate, in a board meeting, again, further validation that, we're all contributing to helping the business win.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's one that I've kind of evangelized for on LinkedIn as of late as well, showing that security can be a way to help generate revenue for the company and really tying security to the success of the business itself versus, just like you said, kind of being relegated to being your own department, doing your own thing, securing the company. But if you can tie that to revenue somehow, that's really the dream scenario. And obviously headcount factors into that as well. I'm hearing a lot from hiring managers in this market, because we are viewed as a cost center. I just can't get all the people that I need to get on board, despite the fact that maybe the market is flooded with really good candidates right now, which is true, like you mentioned. But if you can't open up the roles to invite these people to come apply, it doesn't do you much good if there's all the candidates in the world out there. So any thoughts or suggestions on being able to, I guess, build a business case to get more people on board as well?
I think it comes down to, can you identify and bring the right level of data? A lot of us are great at anecdotally being able to tell a story, to sell a story, and be able to shop that around. But you still need to be able to show what the impact is, especially with current headcount. Do we have alerts or events or issues that are sitting in this triage waiting to be reviewed process because we're understaffed? That has added risk. And thankfully or unthankfully, there's a large number of security events that are publicized almost daily. Using some of those to further legitimize the need of why, or what's the overall risk to the business if we allow some of these things to wait? Do we not have the right amount of application security engineers to be able to enable our developers to code securely and to drive remediation and fixes, using average amount of days to fix a security event or the systemic issues that may come up? It all comes down to, can you have data to support the narrative and the story that you want to shop as far as why do we need this headcount? Because it's easy, for somebody from a business perspective, and I've seen this, we're like, well, I can understand why we need more sellers because we need to grow revenue more, but I don't understand why or what what it is. Is it just that it makes your day better? Or, so I found by bringing some of that data and trying to articulate risk and what that means, that was able to really solidify the story and then figure out where's that negotiation and is it now? Is it in a quarter from now? It also recognized that as a leader in the organization and the business and recognize that I need to make sure that the business wins. I can't come in just bullheaded. Well, we have all this risk and we need these things. And we need these folks. We may need something just a little bit more on the product side or just a little bit more in a different part of the organization. I need to be aware of that. I need to be cognizant of it, supportive of it, and figure out that it may not be a no forever, but maybe a no for now until we get to this specific marker. And so that really kind of brings me to a point of I need to better understand, well, what's holding us back if the answer is not an immediate yes based off of all the data that I've brought and being leaning in on providing creative solutions if that comes up as well.
Yeah, and I would imagine you would almost kind of default to, and for as bad as of a reputation as this idea gets, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It would seem like when you're talking about risks to the company, I mean, that's essentially what it is. I don't know that there's any getting around that. I mean, you have to be able to articulate in, tangible numbers, okay, this is what this risk actually means. Here's what we're, at risk of potentially losing if this does happen. So can you think of a way to spin these risks in such a way where it's not so much of a drive of fear, I guess?
I think it comes down to finding similarities between other companies who have been compromised and there's public information out about them. If they have a similar tech stack, if they operate in a similar vertical, that there's enough there that you can grab where it doesn't become security theater of us trying to just scare everybody into buying in. It's like, no, look, folks, this company looks exactly like us and they operate here and they do these things and we have these things as well. And they've experienced this issue. Is this something we're comfortable with as far as a likely outcome? And if not, great. Here's a plan that we can do to try to minimize some of that risk. And that's really where you go from kind of selling the story and a little bit of the scariness of this can happen to us, and have that become like a real feeling that they can see. But then it's the so what? So what do we do? And recognizing and not telling, well, if we do this, everything goes away. That is never going to be the case. But we can minimize the potential of this actually happening. And here's how we're going to measure it. So it becomes having those plans available and being able to come back and hold yourself accountable to it. Of we thought this was the plan that we agreed upon, and this was the outcome, and this is what happened. And these were the things that were unforeseen, and here's the things that we expected. Finding that the ability to come back and circle up. Some folks are really scared that I've seen of like being held accountable to decisions that are made. And I think, part of how I've always operated is, like that accountability and showing up and being right more times than not, but recognizing I might not always get it right and stating that up front. I feel like that's afforded me and it's grown me a lot of trust with the business. So when you do come with an ask, it's not like, oh, Ray's just kind of, going to try to sell a story. It's like, no, he's going to bring data and, he's going to come back and circle back and say, this is the decision we made and this was the outcome and good, bad, or just as we expected.
Yeah. And you brought up a word that I keyed in on there. You said plans, plural. So it seems to me a best practice would be having a few different scenarios, a few different options for the company to pursue when you're suggesting something. Here's what I would recommend. Here's option 1. We also have option 2, option 3. Here are the associated risks, and here are the metrics to back that up. And, having multiple options makes it easier to work with you, and whoever you're courting basically with this decision, they feel like they have some autonomy, and you're not trying to, like you said, be bullheaded and push folks into something that they're not comfortable with. So that's a great approach.
I find that, anytime somebody comes and you can be part of the ideation process or, choosing an outcome that you feel like you have some level of control over and you have an interest in the outcome. If it wasn't just told to you, this is the thing and this is what we're going to do. It's like, no, we talked about this, and I may come and curate the different options, and I may feel like, there's 4 options and I'm number 2 or number 3 are really where we need to go. We could do 4 and 1. But this is what we go with. just, I found, and even also being a part of on the receiving end of being able to be a part of that process to make a decision, adds a level of buy-in than somebody just telling me, here's what we're going to do. And it's all in how it's laid out. I have 4 kids, and, when my kids were all younger, I may lay out, outfits for them. They can choose it, but I'm going to lay it out for them, so they're not wearing the orange pants and the red shirt and the purple hat. And, and maybe that's cool. And maybe it's not Spirit Day. But at least it's something where they get to choose, and there's an empowerment in being a part of that process.
Yeah, for sure. And they come away with that with a positive viewpoint of having some control over it, like you said, and you get to get the outcome that you want as well. What about when it comes to managing a team and hiring a team? How do you manage them or lead them into being able to do that sort of thing, presenting business cases? And because I think oftentimes what I'll hear from executives is my team members that I have under me, they're very good technically, they're very good at solving problems, but they generally, when they come up with the solution, they just say, well, here's the solution. Or maybe they don't have a solution, maybe they'll just come up with a problem. How do you coach them into providing a good business case if maybe that's not something that comes naturally to them?
I can say, coming up from a technical background, I suffered from that early on. I was, very early in my career, I was quick to point out problems until I had, a leader at the time, though I'm so thankful for having. But his immediate response is like, so what do you suggest we do about it? And I remember at first being like, well, I don't know, that's your job. I'm just bringing you the problems. And then, him empowering me to be like, nope, anybody can identify or spot an issue. It's much harder to figure out, what is the right solution for it, or what are multiple solutions given different constraints that you have. So I think, when it comes down to leading a team like that, one, it's helping them understand how the leadership team or their stakeholders think, what they want to see, and what's going to present best, and helping to, one, give them the opportunity to have that conversation, but giving them enough coaching, guidance, and support to be able to have it. And a lot of it too still comes down to recognizing not everybody is ready for it, but those folks may still have a contributing portion to what gets presented. And then bringing back, what was the feedback? When we presented these options and it was presented this way, it either went really well or it didn't. So what do we learn for next time? Because this isn't a one-time thing. This is a continuous thing. As a business evolves, our team needs to evolve, but we need to be aligned on what that outcome is. But it's empowering, coaching, feedback, and transparency, even leading with, hey, I thought this was the right way to go about it. And so I really pushed us to do this thing and it failed miserably. And that's my fault. And, so here's what we're going to do differently based off of the coaching and feedback that I've received. And, being vulnerable and, earning that trust when you've spent time building those relationships, earning that trust, and then showing coaching and being able to, to fail and not have it be catastrophic. I mean, there's an empowering feeling to that. Like I remember having another leader where she had told me, if you're going to fail fast, have some conviction behind why you think it's right. But if fail fast, and also recognize the difference between going through a one-way door and there's no way back and the business is stuck with the decision that you've made, or, failing fast, knowing that there's a two-way door, it can be quickly undone, because then maybe it's not so great to fail fast if there's no way to go back. And being able to spot the difference. And that's where coaching up some of the other leaders in your orgs, or those folks who are growing into leadership type of roles, helping them understand some of that. I remember it taking me some time to wrap my head around that and figure out, well, this is what I believe it is. And so here's an outcome. Or nope, we're just going to make the decision because it's easy to undo. Let's move fast to help the business continue to win, and, having, some ownership and accountability on that. But giving folks an opportunity and coaching, I mean, that seems to be the constant that I've seen.
Yeah, so obviously that's a very hands-on management style that you take. I imagine it becomes much easier when you're executing on these projects, helping people through failures. It becomes much easier when you've set expectations in the beginning. Like, look, this is what I expect out of my team. I prefer, if we do fail, we do it quickly. And I would imagine that some of that expectation setting happens very on in the hiring process, even before somebody's on your team. The most effective long-term matches that I've made over the course of my career, from the very beginning, from the recruiting, early recruiting steps through the interview process to the onboarding, everything was cohesive and it followed a process, and expectations were set along the way. And so everybody knew what they were getting into every step of the way. And people feel very comfortable when there's some structure and when they know what to expect. I've seen a lot of turnover happen with folks I talk to that are looking to get out of their current employer because it's not, expectations weren't set properly. They were maybe sometimes purposefully set improperly. And so when somebody came on board, they thought they were getting into this good positive situation, but then once they did get on board, it was a very negative thing. So how do you ensure that when you're interviewing somebody and they're going through those initial stages, that you're setting expectations and you're setting up people for success in the long run? I suppose that would kind of lead into retention as well. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I'll treat the retention piece second. And first, I think it's still, when you're talking to a candidate about the role, I mean, it behooves you and really everybody involved to be as honest about what the role is. I used to joke in the past because there was like, every job was kind of like an iceberg. Like, the top part that you can see is what they talked about in the interview. And then you get there and you realize there's this whole thing under the water that's kind of the thing they didn't want to scare you off with or anything else, but you're stuck with. It's part of the job. And now I feel like, gee, it'd be great for both the candidate as well as the hiring manager, or even, the folks that are a part of the interview panel, to be honest with what they see in those challenges. Because you're either going to get somebody really fired up of, me, I thrive on challenge. If there's a little bit of chaos and things are a little ugly and they need to be built up, like those are the types of things or opportunities where I've leaned into. And not to say, I've joined companies and they've been, terrible and I was the one to come and fix, but knowing that there's things that need to be worked on, or there's opportunities to drive change, those aren't negatives. And, I would implore other hiring managers to be really transparent and honest around what the expectations are, both from an operating and how do we expect to work and how do we expect to communicate, but also get a really strong understanding of what the problems are that need to be solved. Because that may fire somebody up come day one, rather than they come in day one and they're like, oh, well, here's this laundry list of things that are actually really bad that you're going to own here as well. That can immediately start that relationship on the wrong foot. And maybe they're like, I didn't sign up for this. This is different. So I think, honest, clear, transparent. I mean, that's a consistency. Those are like personal pillars of mine. I think it resonates well with candidates and in the workplace to lead with the same. On the retention side, I think it still comes down to, helping your team as well as your stakeholders understand what are the decisions we need to make, why are we making them, and when we come up with solutions for these, why these specific solutions, and then how are we going to measure the overall success of these things, and the honesty, the transparency, and maybe even the vulnerability at time of like, we may not get this right. I may need to make a decision because I need to make something quick, but I'm going to try to do it as educated as possible. But if I make the wrong call, I'm going to be held accountable for it, and I can talk about it, and I worked at places where I had a leader tell me, you never say, don't apologize, for something. And I was like, no, man, I should have known something and I dropped the ball on it. And so I fully own that. And making that a part of the culture, I think, could be huge.
Yeah, for sure. And you brought up a point earlier about trust and how important that is. I think expectation setting and staying close to your employees, building that trust goes a long way towards retention as well. If you feel like your manager doesn't have your best interests at heart, you're much more likely to be out the door the first time a recruiter like me approaches you with, what looks like a better opportunity. So there's so much that goes into it. And obviously each person is different. I spend a lot of time in my recruiter screens talking to people about their motivators, because I believe that more than skill set is more important for long-term career matches. If you have a job despite its challenges and flaws, it meets those motivators that somebody has, and maybe part of it is being challenged, like you mentioned. Those folks are more likely to stick around. Obviously, you can't legislate for every change in a company, especially with startups too. I've worked with a lot of startups over the years, and things change so fast that sometimes it's hard to get your head around that, especially if you feel like the decisions being made were out of your control. Have you ever had a situation where you had to try and help an employee cope with a major change that maybe came down from on high?
I will probably say that just about every organization that I've worked at, there's been that sort of situation. And what I found is there's things that you can be open and honest with, and there's just things that you can't, that happen at the executive level or the board level. The message or the way it's delivered or what the crux of it is really kind of where you focus on, and less around like maybe what was actually said. But it still comes down to, there's an outcome that needs to happen. There's something that needs to change, or the business is changing. And so we need X, Y, and Z to occur. Like it's finding out sort of the right message, like I mentioned, being a dad of 4 and, my oldest being 25, my youngest being 10, I approach them even with the same problem slightly differently because they have their own unique personalities, but also, different motivators and what they overall value. And so having a better understanding of like my team and who they are may slightly change the way that I approach, the narrative. But you still can't go wrong with it. This is what needs to happen here at the end, and here's why. Most folks, when they understand the why, can be like, well, that sucks and I don't agree, but at least I know, rather than having this feeling of like, oh, well, I don't even understand why, and it's just being forced on me. It's a tough pill to swallow. I know I've been there early in my career. Being asked to do something that I didn't agree with and I didn't understand, yet, disagreeing and committing, and maybe finding out, okay, it was because of this thing that I was fully unaware of. Maybe it wasn't my place in the role at the time where I needed to know. But if there's trusting relationships where you can have a conversation, even acknowledge, hey, I know this sounds not great, but trust me on this. This is where we want to get to. It's easier. And that's really why I think you have, leaders and managers in between sort of like those top level roles at like the board or CEO, all the way down to, the individual contributor. It's to help with some of the translation and the motivation and the support that everybody needs.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, I think the why is very important, even if it's, parsed a little bit by the manager to be digestible in an appropriate way by the employees. Certainly the why is important. Now, you kind of alluded to this earlier, that maybe the hiring challenges out there are a little bit different in this market versus, previously when everybody was scrounging to hire the same people and there weren't enough people on the market. There was a literal lack of talent out there. Maybe now not so much, relative to the number of openings. Are there any specific hiring challenges that you've encountered over the years in, this market currently or previously? Anything that kind of came up periodically?
I think when I've written job descriptions, or even job descriptions that I've read as a candidate myself, you mentioned it previously as well, of everybody's looking for that unicorn, who can write code, but who can publicly speak and, single-handedly run a business and do all of these things. One of the things that I had to learn, as an early hiring manager, are what are the things that really matter and what are those things that are nice to have, and being a little bit more front and center of like you are the ideal candidate if, and then, some of these other things are definitely, positives, but may not necessarily be required. I can think of, multiple times where I've seen and, have joked with friends about a job description they've seen saying, you need 20 years of this technology that's only 3 years old. And, finding the right way to articulate what the real business needs are. I think it still comes down to knowing what you really need and knowing where you could compromise, but also recognizing too, if the market's different and you may be able to be a little bit more aggressive with the things that you really want. figure out what those things really are and what do those things matter. And lastly, I'll say there's been times in my career where I've looked at candidates and been really attracted to either their experience, but also recognizing there's a cultural aspect to them being successful and the team being successful. We bring them in, and making sure that you poke and prod on your internal culture and the things that matter to the team, that you screen for those as well, because you may have this Nobel Prize winning awesome engineer, but they just have a terrible attitude, or there's a trait that will just not mesh well overall. I've made that mistake in the past as well, and have also seen ways where we've been able to spot that in the interview process. Being able to screen for that. I will say on the opposite side too, as a candidate, being really clear about what's important to you, what are non-negotiables, and what are those things you are willing to negotiate on. And when I talk to candidates for roles that I'm hiring for, it's a little bit of a red flag when they don't have questions at all, but also especially questions about just the environment, the culture, leadership style. It's like I would always ask myself, well, why would this person not ask? And you can chalk it up to a lot of things. Maybe they're just too nervous. There's a lot of things swimming in their head, and they want to put their best foot forward. But you should have a really strong understanding of where you're going, and know that this is the place that I want to be, and it's going to help me grow. And may have these other things, but I'm aware of it, so I can bring my A game and manage around it. So yeah.
You brought up an interesting point earlier about how sometimes you can do what you think is your best possible job at screening somebody, interviews well, with your team and everything like that. But by the time they get on board, it almost seems like something has changed. Maybe you overlooked something. I think that happens fairly often. Because I think in general, interviews, they tend to be kind of almost stilted. They're not so much like just a conversation between two people. You have this formal set of questions you need to make sure you get answered, and make sure all the interviewers are on the same page. So sometimes in doing your due diligence, it can be very formal and rigid, and you don't necessarily get to the heart of somebody and what motivates them. You'd mentioned that kind of looking back, you had an idea of maybe what you could have done differently. Could you share that with us? What you had learned in that scenario?
I think having a better organization to the interview panel, I think, is probably one of the strongest things that I was able to learn along the way. Of if there are 5 or 6 people involved, we can't all be asking the same questions. And I've been there to the point where when we go in our debrief and we're like, oh, I asked about this. Oh, well, I did too. Oh, okay. Well, that's why this answer seems so polished by the time, we got to it. But by setting an expectation with the interview panel of what's important to you and the area of focus, and getting an understanding of the types of questions that you want to ask. Also recognizing too, you may have 30 minutes, you may have 45 minutes, maybe even an hour with the candidate. You can't cover all the things. And so have them focus on one specific area, and that gives them a chance to go a little bit deeper. And it becomes a little bit less surface level where, me in my initial discussion with the candidate, before I even put them in the panel, I want to get to know them as a human being. Like, is this something that we feel can be in even like a trusting relationship? Is there their interests that align with what we're looking for on the team or for the company? And, how do they show up and present? And, is there some sort of relatable piece? And then my next conversation with them is very much more pointed around a single specific topic, so that I can get deeper in the time that we have allowed. And I found that we had less of those like, oh, shoot, this person's not who we thought we were. It tend to be a little bit better if we had a stronger understanding. And then it ended up becoming more of a net positive of like, oh, shoot, we thought they were here, but after a month, like, they're operating up here. And, how awesome is that for all of us? So I think that was one piece that I had learned that tend to yield much better outcomes with the candidate as well. And it also gave folks an opportunity to personally, get to know someone, especially around like the topic to which they're addressing. You have them cover 7 different questions around 7 different topics. It's really tough to get a good understanding. And sometimes you have those folks who kind of stall, or maybe they ask questions and they don't really get a chance. I've seen in times where folks on the interview panel walk away and they're like, I only got through like one question, and I still don't have an understanding of who this person is or if they would be successful in the role. That's an interesting topic.
Yeah. So to any interviewees out there, answers in general should be succinct, enough information to explain your point without going overboard. And if you feel like you may not have covered enough, you can always ask, did that answer your question? That's a good way to go about it. Yeah, you brought up a great point. I think would be a best practice is to have the whole interview committee basically all get together and really understand, have a strategy, know that they're, not asking the same questions and everybody has an area of focus. And that really improves the candidate experience as well. The candidate feels like you got your stuff together and you're, because I've had candidates come back to me and do a debrief. They're like, oh yeah, they just asked the same question everybody else did. That's not a great impression for the candidate either. And obviously you want to cover as much ground, like you said, as you talk to somebody. One common pitfall I see, kind of going back to the job description thing that you had mentioned earlier, you'd mentioned years of experience. And that to me has always been a sticking point. One person's 7 years of experience in this thing doesn't equate to somebody else's 7 years of experience in that thing. It's just not descriptive enough to know what all somebody's done with that tool or in that capacity. So generally, I'm a fan of in job descriptions and thinking about interviews too, being as descriptive as you can about what that person really needs to know without relying on sort of the crutch of years of experience. So, did somebody administer this tool? Did they create new rules? What did they do specifically for this thing? And that'll help you in the long run. So yeah, we covered some retention, interviews. That's all great. What about accomplishments as a hiring manager? Obviously, you're very passionate about managing and hiring the best folks out there. So can you think of any specific accomplishments that you're really proud of over the years?
Being a dad, I also coach high school football. I found that helping others succeed is something that really drives me. And that's something that I get a lot of joy out of. And so I feel like I have so many supportive accomplishments of folks that I've hired, folks that I've mentored, folks that I've coached, seeing them continue to grow either with new skills that I would support them with or just being there in a supportive capacity and then watching them grow. In my years at Cisco, I was able to bring in an intern who I brought in as a new college grad and to see her continue to grow in her career. It's fantastic. She's now a people leader, and I was able to support her in her interview process, even after I had left. But watching her continue to grow, it's a similar type of feeling I have, with one of my children and when they learn how to ride the bike, and it's like, I didn't do it, they did it, but I was, able to be enough of a support, to whatever they felt that they needed to watch them succeed. And I think that's something that's awesome. And I can think of just about every place that I've been at. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to have supported so many folks and watched them grow in their career. I can think of every place that I've been at, even my current organization where there's somebody that I worked with that has since left and gone on to take a role that was that next step for them and to see them be successful. And all those are awesome. And that's, I think, what really drives me.
Very cool. Yeah. You brought up a good point about how you really enjoy fostering people. And that makes me think, most hiring managers that I've really enjoyed working with over the years, they have that same passion for growing people, and which hopefully we can kind of get to how you've been able to hire at the more junior and entry levels. I think there's a lack of that happening in the industry. But you also, I think when you're mentoring somebody like that, they have to have potential. If somebody's a completely blank slate and they don't have any experience, there has to be something there to grow. How do you recognize potential in somebody that you're looking to hire?
It shows up in a few different ways. Are they organized? Do they show up on time? Do they even know what they want? I may make myself available to a lot of folks, but I'm also very guarded of the time that I'll invest. And, so anybody that I've had the opportunity to take on where I would provide some sort of mentoring, I assess that in that first, I don't commit to it prior to. And I said, well, let's get to know each other. Let me understand your goals and let me understand what you're looking for so that I can see if I'm even the right fit. I don't want to waste your time and certainly don't want to waste mine. So I think, those things, it really comes down to like desire and, are they willing to follow through with things that we discuss? I've had folks who, I can think of this individual who's, his goal was, I want to earn $1 million a year in salary. How do I do that? And I'm like, shoot, I can think about ways that maybe other folks have gotten there, but I don't know if that's a likely outcome here that I can personally help you with. But I've had others who were just like, I want to learn. They're willing to put in effort. If I give them, an assignment, if you will, to read, and then let's come back and figure out what are the things that you felt fit with you, and then how do we apply that to situations in your life. Those are the things that I think are very telling around somebody who wants to be coached and who will be coached and who has a higher chance of being successful in the relationship. Because I've equally has found others who would just either show up late constantly or, life's busy. I didn't have a chance to do that. I'm like, sure, we're all busy, but you prioritize the things that are important to you. So I think that those are the traits that I think that I always look for first. Are they clear on what they want or what they need? Are they open to coaching? If I raise an observation to them, is it something that we can discuss, or is it something that they get defensive about? Those are all things that I think end up standing out around, when you're coaching someone, you're mentoring someone, supporting them. I've in the past invested tons of time in someone who I realized didn't even really want to be coached and didn't really want that support. And it was a good retrospective of like pouring in a ton of energy for someone's no.
Yeah, that's not a good feeling for sure. Yeah, you brought up a good point about follow through. It seems so rare these days to me. People actually doing what they say they're going to do. It's such a differentiator, and it's such a basic thing that not everybody does. And like you said, often I'll run into folks because I do free career guidance calls with people. They'll promise they're going to do something, then they don't do it, and that's pretty obvious to me that person's going to struggle. So yeah, that's a great point. What about, so we kind of touched on this, hiring at the entry level. I think the industry has a massive problem in that we have a pipeline problem. We do not have enough entry level jobs for folks to come into. That's why they say breaking into security, because it is that difficult. And we have, at least tens of thousands of people trying to break into the industry right now. Have you ever been able to hire at the entry level? And if so, how did you do it?
I have, and I think part of it is the structure in the organization to be able to support bringing somebody in at an entry level role, and recognizing you need support around them for them to be successful. So I think that's kind of priority number one. If I'm the only security person and the company's really busy and I'm wearing a ton of different hats, I need to recognize I may not have the time to invest in that person for them to provide them the support that rightfully they need to break in and continue to find success. And so I think having that team to support them that you can surround them with, I think is critical, and being, honest and transparent there about what that looks like. The other piece is, I think, kind of checking yourself from a hiring manager of, can we grow someone who may have a higher ceiling? You end up having a good understanding of your folks, and there are folks who they're happy to punch the clock and, they feel really good about life and they do a great job, but maybe they don't aspire to really hit that next level. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you want to make sure you continue to build for, maybe they decide to move on, or maybe there's other things in play. I think having an understanding of, can you support them? Do you understand what the business needs? And then you can you help support them as their needs grow and change overall? So I've been able to hire both, at the entry level, as well as even like bringing interns in and having them in for the long term and then converting them. I think it's also too, looking for very similarly to folks who can be mentored. You're not looking for specific experience, with a SIM tool, or have they done incident response and what does that look like? But maybe you're looking for, do you have an analytical mind, and are you curious? And, do you read, and do you currently develop yourself? Are there things about you that continue to drive you to be better? Or, I've unfortunately met folks who've graduated and they feel like things should be handed to them. And so I felt like this may not be the right team for you, because a lot of the folks are continuing to push themselves to grow and to learn and to take some of these opportunities. So I think identifying those traits that are important in less experienced folks, and then giving them an opportunity to excel, and then recognizing they may not hit the mark, and then asking yourself, did I do a terrible job of explaining, or was it a bad job of execution, or was it something in the middle? I tend to lean more on that. I didn't do a good job explaining, which is why we didn't have the right outcome. But also, just being there to support them and know I made tons of mistakes in my career, especially when I was, younger, and so thankful to have, where I'm not failing catastrophically and having some level of support. But I would say that last piece is allowing them to make decisions and make mistakes and allow them to learn from them. I feel like I've learned way more from failures throughout my career than I have, some of those wins that I've notched along the way, because those are like the, holy crap, things need to change. I need to do, a better job, or I need to think twice before I do these types of things.
So kind of common theme, I guess we discussed this earlier, failing quickly and making mistakes, but correcting quickly and learning a lesson from that. How do you draw the line between making mistakes and making too many mistakes for some people that, are reporting to you? How do you assess whether somebody's going to work out or not?
Not every mistake is equal or even. And, a lot of it too is, if I can see what the path is likely going to be for them, giving them some coaching, some guidance, but also being real of, when you do make a mistake, let's understand why this happened, and setting the expectation of like, we can't continue to fail. And so if we do I have you in the wrong role? Are your strengths elsewhere, or are you just not interested? Why are those failures continuing to occur? Because there's lots of different things. We're all human. It could be that person, and I've gone through tough periods in life where things just take away some of my attention. And I worked for eBay very early in my career. I made a bonehead mistake of taking all of sign-in for United States down for about 5 minutes. And I never made that mistake again. But it was because I was focused on something that was impacting my life, and I didn't have 100% attention there. And I'm thankful that I wasn't berated for it, constantly. But if I constantly did that, sure as heck know that I would not have lasted there. And so you figure out, what does that look like, from how many failures are too much? And I think, why did the failure occur? If you take a time to understand the human and what's going on, if there's lots of issues constantly, then again, maybe they need to go off and work on things, and then, maybe something in the future will work out. But everybody makes mistakes, and trying to understand and support and correct them. But be there again, be present to make sure that you can understand the difference. Because even now in my job and in my company, I may not always make the right call, but I want to be, honest and transparent about it. And I'm thankful I have, supportive peers on the leadership team who, are able to give me feedback, guidance, and support. But again, if I'm failing constantly, I don't think my boss is going to be like, you know what, Ray, you're a great guy. Don't worry about it. At some point, there's going to be a level of accountability that I'm going to have to answer to.
Yeah. So I think, if you have somebody make a mistake, you really need to spend the time, like you mentioned, to sit down with that person, understand why the mistake happened, go past the surface level, kind of like we talked about doing in interviews. And if you go a little bit deeper than that, you have a better understanding of how it occurred, then you can set expectations and say, look, this can't happen again. How can we ensure that it's not going to happen again? Let's talk about it and come up with a plan for the future. I think oftentimes these things can be very formal, performance improvement plans and things like that. I think you don't necessarily get the best out of somebody when they're living in constant fear of their job being threatened. But at the same time, it's a fine line. You have to, let them know that continued mistakes aren't acceptable. And sometimes that's a tough line to walk. So, great response there. So we're coming up on time here, Ray. So just one last question for you. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
I think it goes back to a point that I had made previously of identifying the traits that you want in that team, especially if somebody's going to break in an entry-level role. What are those traits that you really want, and where are you willing to lean in and support? I'm so thankful that there's so many times where I was able to give somebody an opportunity and they just really excelled. And I'm like, wow, if we went with this other candidate who we thought had more, but more on the resume, but less in like the personality and what we thought they brought, so I'm so thankful for that. So I would say, understand what those things really are, and then where you can lean in on to support and let folks surprise you and, give folks opportunity. At the end of the day, I understand we're not running an after school special here at most organizations, but surely, with the right support and the right candidate who has the right values, you can only see them, excel. And it still comes down to everybody who's gotten into a higher level role. At some point, somebody had taken a chance and given them an opportunity, myself included, to be able to take that next step along their journey. And so that could be this for them, and you can continue to watch them grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. To sum it all up, I think take a chance on people. Look for those intangibles, those motivators, those things that make people happy to get out of bed in the morning. And if they have the right attitude, the skills can be taught. So that I think encapsulates a lot of what we encounter as the talent gap in the industry. We're not looking for those intangibles. We're looking for things on a piece of paper, and that way of hiring has its limits, obviously. Well, it's a great place to wrap up. Appreciate your time, Ray. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
The best way to reach out is on LinkedIn. So Ray Espinoza. I'm also on Twitter, or X, to which it's known now, at Ray Espinoza Sec, but very much more active on LinkedIn overall.
Great. Well, appreciate your time, Ray. Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.